title of this video is Hell Forever, and that'll make more sense as we go along with it. But your first thought when you saw that title probably was, hell, what does that have to do with prophecy? This is a prophecy group. Well, it turns out that there is a prophecy associated with hell, and it doesn't seem to be well understood by many people, and so that's going to be our focus here. Have you ever said something to a person like, unbelievers go to hell forever? And that's that hell forever name, that's where that comes from. And so many people say that. I've heard people say that, and that's a general understanding that most people have. And even most pastors, I would say, have that same understanding. They believe that hell is the final destination for unbelievers. So those people who, when they die, if they are unbelievers, when they die, they go to hell and they stay there forever. So that's hell forever. And what amazes me about that is that the Bible directly contradicts statements like that. It directly says that is not the final destination for unbelievers. And once you understand what the Bible does say, it's going to give you a better understanding of other things that the Bible says. So this is going to be kind of a small thing that will help you understand other things as well. So what does happen to unbelievers when they die? What does the Bible say is going to be really our focus here. And so most people think this is what happens to unbelievers when they die. They are judged, and immediately as soon as they die, they're judged, and they go to hell forever. But the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says, now this is from Revelation 20, 13 through 15, and it says, and the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and hell gave up their dead that were in them, and they were judged, every one according to their works. And hell and death were cast into the pool of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found in the book of life was cast into the pool of fire. So what this passage says about what happens is people go to hell, they are taken out of hell, then they are judged, and then they go to the pool of fire forever. Now, pool of fire is a symbolic reference here. We're going to talk about that on the next slide and get into that a little bit more. It's more commonly called the lake of fire in other translations, but the same idea exists there. And so what we see here is a completely different scenario. It says that people go to hell, and then they're taken out of hell at a later time, and they are judged when they're taken out of hell, and they go, those who are found not written in the book of life, we expect that that's most, if not all of them, and they go to the pool of fire forever. So that's where the final destination is for unbelievers. It is not hell. Okay, so what is this lake of fire? It's a symbolic description. It's not a proper name, although we often use it as a proper name. And that's really because the Bible doesn't give us any other proper name to use for it. But it's really a symbolic description. And the fire refers to the torment that's experienced by those who are there. And the idea of a lake is kind of a place where all of these people are, and they are all being tormented by fire at this time. But the Bible has other references to this. And one of those is to it being a place of outer darkness. And that, I think that comes from Matthew, and it says, you will be thrown into outer darkness. And it also has another reference in the Bible to being eaten by a worm forever. And their worm, it says, will eat on them forever. And so those are two more symbolic, let's say, descriptions of what the torment will be like and where it will be. And so I think of outer darkness. Now, this is me. The Bible doesn't really explain outer darkness, but I think of it as being outside of our universe. And in our universe is the place where God created light. And so being thrown out of our universe would be into a place of outer darkness. And so that makes sense to me, but I'm guessing quite a bit there. So don't take that as being from the Bible. So, but what's important to understand here is the idea that the lake of fire is a description for a place where people will go as the eternal destination, and it is a place of torment that goes on forever. Okay, now what's interesting about hell is that there are lots of other names that are used in the Bible besides hell. And what I've done is I picked out one verse from Revelation and done it in different translations. And so these different translations use different words for that. And you can see that other than that, all three of these are very much the same. So in this one, you see the word hell being used, and that's the one that we used on the previous slide. And so everything about this translation is pretty much identical to all of the others here, except that the word hell is used. And in this translation here, this is NIV, a more common translation, uses Hades as that word. and translates whatever is in the Greek into the word Hades. And we'll look at what the Greek actually says in a moment. And so that's one difference. That's the only real difference here, but that's different than Hades. And now in this translation down here, a different word is used again, and that's the word Sheol. Well, a lot of people don't even know what the word Sheol is or where it comes from. But here's a different word entirely that is being used in place of hell or Hades. So why is it that we're seeing three different names being used here? Why are these other names being used? Why don't we use just one name for all of these things? And there's a good reason for it. Okay, the word Sheol, we'll start with that one, is in Hebrew. Sheol is a Hebrew word. You see it used in the Old Testament, in quite a few places in the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, it is the place of all of the dead. So everyone who dies, when they die, they go to Sheol. And as I said, there's quite a few references in the Old Testament about that. And Strong's Concordance, which is the book that gives us kind of the definitions for all of the Bible words, it says that Sheol is the underworld. It is the place to which people descend at death. And what that really means is that all people go there at death. Not just the unbelievers or the believers, but all people go there at death. And so that's the word from the Old Testament that is used in the Hebrew of the Old Testament. Now, some translators take some liberties there that they really shouldn't be, and they translate this word in the Hebrew into the English phrase, the grave. But that's not a good translation. Hebrew has a different word for grave, and so you really shouldn't be using that there, and especially with Sheol meaning something different than the grave. And just as Strong's Concordance says, it says that's where people descend to at death. So, so here's a representation from Genesis 37 of the actual Hebrew word for the grave being used, and that is different. And it says, "No, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." Okay, so what he's saying there, he's not talking about Sheol, he's talking about dying. So he's saying, I'm going to keep on mourning the death of my son until I join him in death, in the grave. And so he's really just talking about death there and not Sheol. And a different Hebrew word is used. As I said, the word Sheol is not what's used in that Genesis passage. So unfortunately, the Old Testament really does not get into anything in detail about Sheol. It doesn't tell us what it's like, where we might understand it, parts being, but we do get some information in the New Testament about it, and that was never in the Old Testament. But still, Old Testament has almost no things there. It only talks occasionally about people being in Sheol, and even people in Sheol welcoming other people who are coming into Sheol. So references like that are the only detail we get about it. So the other word that we saw in the previous slide was the word Hades. Now Hades comes from the Greek language, and so we see that in the New Testament. And in the Greek language, the Greek Hades is the place of all of the dead. Once again, it's not a place for just the bad people. It's a place for all of the people who die, and that's where everyone goes. And this word in Greek gets translated in different ways, and that's what we saw on that previous slide. It's translated, or I guess, yeah, translated into the English word Hades from the Greek writing of Hades, and it's also translated sometimes as just place of the dead, and so that phrase is used instead of the word Hades, and also you'll often see it translated as hell. And so the Greek Hebrew, or the Greek Hades word is translated in three different ways depending on what translator is translating it, and for different reasons. So sometimes we see the Greek word expressed in English as Hades, sometimes it is place of the dead, and sometimes it is hell. So that's where Hades comes from. The word hell is actually an Anglo-Saxon word, and it's spelled with just one L in the Anglo-Saxon rendering of it. It is also just a place of all of the dead. It is not a place for a select group of people. It is everyone who dies goes there. Now, Hades has, in the Greek mythology, it has a god who is in charge of it, who is also called Hades. And so that place of the dead has a guard who's in charge, or a god who's in charge of who enters, who leaves, those sort of things. He's the master of the underworld. And it's similar with hell. Hell also has, in the Anglo-Saxon religion, it has a goddess, in fact, who is in charge of it and determines who comes in and orders all that sort of stuff. We don't know very much about hell because there wasn't an awful lot written in Anglo-Saxon about it, but there is tons written in Greek about Hades. And so we know an awful lot about Hades and what it was, or what people believed it was. And it's not what we understand at all as the place of the dead. Um, in Hades, the Greek mythology believes that there's a boatman in there, and this boatman who is traveling around on this river Styx is picking up people on one side of the river and carrying them across the river, and he charges them a fare to do that, and that fare is a coin that they have in their mouth when they die and find themselves in Hades. Just as they kind of become conscious in Hades, they realize that there's a coin in their mouth, and they take this coin out of the mouth and they give it to the boatsman who's on the river Styx, and he carries them across the river Styx, and then they kind of wander off to their ultimate destination, either good or bad, from there. So if you say none of that's in the Bible, you're completely right. None of that is biblical. So the Greek Hades idea is not a biblical idea at all. And that might be why some people are choosing not to use the word Hades, because it just doesn't line up right. So those Hades and hell places are coming from different languages, different religions, and aren't really biblical. So for all three of those names, we saw that each one of them was a place for all of the dead. It wasn't selective about anything. But we also see that somehow in modern understanding, people have come to think of them differently and think of hell and Hades as being places where only the unbelievers go. And the Bible doesn't support that either. So what we've seen here in summary is we've seen that hell forever is an idea that is contradicted by prophecy, and that was kind of why the prophecy link is in here. And so prophecy says that there will be a time when the people will be taken out of hell and judged at that time, and then after that, then they will be sent to the lake of fire or the pool of fire, depending on your translation.